Welcome to the Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs podcast, a place for podcasters to learn what's actually working in the world of podcasting and how to use their podcast to generate consistent leads in their business. I'm your host, Jenny, and I'm so excited you're here.
Hi, Savvies. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I'm super excited you're here. So today we are diving into how to self-audit your show, because I know that not everyone has the budget to pay someone to conduct an audit on their podcast. So I want to share some helpful tips and tricks that you can audit your own podcast and make improvements to your show without having to outsource it. And I want to caveat this, that there is a lot of different things you can do. And if you've been podcasting for a while, you might be like, whoa, this is so much. But just take it one step at a time and figure out what is going to be the most important things for you to improve first, and then go from there. Because if you have, 20 episodes out of your show, it's going to be a lot easier to optimize everything than it is if you have years and years of content. So let's jump in. So first up, I think this is so crucial, and a lot of people don't do it because they feel like it's cringy, but I want you to actually listen to your episodes from start to finish. I'm not saying go back in your archives to the beginning, but just your kind of most recent 3 to 5 episodes and listen to them from start to finish. Listen as if you were a first-time listener. You want to pay attention to the flow, the pacing, the audio quality, and overall just like the content itself, and look at it from like that bird's eye view of like, what would I think about this if I was a new listener versus like, listening to it as yourself. So that is number one. And that's going to be a really hard step for some people because some people hate listening to their voice back. But I think it's really important because then you can see where you can improve. Next up, you want to check your audio quality. You want to ensure that your audio quality of your podcast is clear and consistent throughout your episode. You want to pay attention to any background noise that may be present, distortion, different volume levels, especially if you have guests, because sometimes you might be higher than your guest and vice versa, and any other audio issues that might affect your listeners' experience. This is really important because with a podcast, it's really important to have high quality audio. People can forgive slip-ups here and there, but if they're constantly having to turn up and down the volume between you and your guests, then they likely aren't going to stick around for long because that's just kind of annoying no matter what you're doing, because it might sound like one person is like whispering and the other person is yelling, and that's just not fun. So that's number 2. Number 3, you want to evaluate your content structure and organization. So you want to consider the structure and organization of your episodes, assess if the content is well segmented, if it flows smoothly, if it stays focused on the main topic or theme. You want to be aware of any tangents or rambling that could be edited or trimmed. I do think it's good to let your listeners get to know you a little bit better because people connect with people, not robots. But if most of your episode is just like random fluff, then you're going to experience some drop off in listenership because people are there to learn most likely or be entertained. And if you're just talking about random things about your day-to-day all of the time, it's not like a specific ask me anything type episode, it could turn some people off. And I have a couple clients who do quite a bit of personal stuff, but they kind of know their audience really well. They've been doing this podcast for like 10 plus years. So their listeners love them and want to hear from them. But that might not always be the case when you're first starting out. So just kind of make sure you're cognizant of that. You also want to assess your delivery and speaking style. So just take a look at your own performance as a host of the podcast or speaker. Listen for clarity, articulation, pacing, and energy, and just be aware of any verbal tics or repetitive phrases that you use, things like or like, or any other speech patterns that you may want to improve on. It is a lot easier in post-production if you can catch these while you're recording and not say them, refrain from saying them. But if not, then some, if not all of this, can be edited out in the post-production process. Things like likes, long pauses, things like that. So don't stress yourself out too much about this step because it can be improved in the post-production process. It's not like you have to completely start from scratch if you use the word or like, or if you have a long pause. You also want to review the episode descriptions and titles. So take a look at those titles and descriptions, make sure they're accurately representing the content and are able to effectively grab the attention of your potential listeners, because a lot of the time people will look at the title and or description and decide if they want to listen to the episode at all. So that's a really big thing to have optimized. And you want to make any necessary adjustments to optimize their searchability and their, attention grabbing capabilities. I would recommend going through at least your last 10 or so episodes for this, and then slowly working your way through your entire backlog of episodes, because I know that some of us have a pretty extensive backlog that you won't be able to get through in just a few hours. So don't try to do that, because that can be overwhelming and you don't want to spend your whole, working period doing this audit if you don't have time for that. So you can break it into chunks so it's not so overwhelming. You also want to analyze your audience engagement. So pay attention to the parts of your podcast where engagement might tend to drop or listener interest will kind of fade. And you want to identify areas where you can improve that engagement, such as adding more storytelling elements to the episode, incorporating some questions, or bringing in guest experts for specific topics as needed. I also recommend that you make sure that you have a call to action or a CTA in every single episode. It does not need to be a hard sell every single time, but to me, I think it's really important to tell your listeners what actions you want them to take, because if you don't, then they're not going to do it. And you're going to be like, well, why is no one doing what I want them to do? Well, they're not mind readers. So very important. You should also seek feedback from trusted listeners. So share some of your episodes with a few trusted friends or colleagues or people in your audience who can provide you with honest feedback. So ask for their opinions on the content, the audio quality, and the overall listening experience. And you want to take their suggestions into account for future improvements. You don't have to go back and do anything with your old episodes. This would just be going forward. But I find that sometimes we can be our own worst critic, and we're very hard on ourselves, but sometimes we also get used to a certain way of doing things and we don't always notice any gaps that might be there. So this would be a great opportunity for these people to tell you, if there's any gaps that you could fill that you're not recognizing on your own. So once you've done all this stuff, and as you're going through the process, take notes and make a plan. So jot down notes about the areas that you find that are needing improvement, and create an actionable plan to really address these points, whether it's different editing techniques, equipment upgrades that are needed, or even refining your hosting skills. I feel like that's something that can always be refined, even if we've been podcasting for a number of years. You don't need to start implementing all of these things immediately, but you can focus on the most important ones first and then start to work on the others after that. And then obviously, as we should, you want to implement those improvements. So act on any feedback and insights you've gathered during this self-audit. Make any changes to your episodes, audio quality, delivery, or other aspects that require improvement as needed. And I think it's really important to repeat this process regularly. It should be happening on at least once a year, if not every 6 months, just so you can continue improving, because even if you're a seasoned podcaster, there's definitely going to be things you can improve on, even if you've been podcasting for years. So keep that in mind. And I just want to throw in a little reminder is don't be too hard on yourself. Whether you're only a few months in or you've been podcasting for several years, we all have improvements that can be made. So don't beat yourself up if you feel like there's a mountain of improvements that you need to make. You're not alone, and it's okay. Because we all start somewhere. And honestly, I'm extremely proud of you for putting yourself out there in the first place, because starting a podcast is a big undertaking. So keep putting out new episodes and working on improving over time. That's pretty much all you can ask for. And I will be over here cheering you on every single step of the way. I promise. Now, I love to know, have you ever done a self-audit of your show before? Let me know over on Instagram. My handle is podcasting for entrepreneurs. I'd love to chat with you about that. And if you haven't done an audit before, which area are you like looking to improve the most? Like, what do you think you will need to improve the most, basically? I'd love to know. It's always interesting to see what people think they're going to struggle with the most. And if you want to check out the show notes for this episode, you can do that by going to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com. And I will see you in the next episode.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast player like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher, and leave a review. You can find us at savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com and on Facebook at Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs and Instagram at Savvy Podcasting. Make sure to join our free Facebook community for podcasters by going to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com/community and join in on the exclusive community just for Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs listeners. I'll see you there.